Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something pretty unique, actually. It's a deep look at just one specific study.
Right.
It's called Abrahamic Covenant and Israel's Rebirth. And our mission really is to explore this idea it presents, this kind of hidden clock within biblical history, supposedly counting down to, well, our time.
It's definitely a bold piece of work. The core hypothesis, it's audacious. They're hunting for a divine blueprint, essentially.
A blueprint?
Yeah, one that links the ancient origins of Israel way back to its very recent rebirth. Specifically, they're looking at 1948.
The founding of the modern state of Israel.
Exactly. They propose that event wasn't, just politics or history happening,
Yeah.
but a direct fulfillment of prophecy.
Yeah.
And one that's numerically coded, starting from the very beginning.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge claim. So before we even get to the numbers, we have to start with Abraham, right? The source really grounds this in his story.
It does.
It points straight to Hebrews 11, where it says, Abraham went out not knowing where he was going, living like an alien in the land of promise, just dwelling in tents.
And that image is absolutely central for the authors. Abraham's physical journey becomes the archetype for faith itself. A life built on radical trust, always focused on a promise yet to be fully seen.
The source dives into the specifics of his call, too. He was, 75?
75 years old, yeah. When Jehovah calls him out of Haran, he'd originally come from Ur of the Chaldeans.
And the call came with these massive promises. First, a specific land, which is Israel.
Right.
And second, something more. A city, a temple, but one that God himself would build, not man-made.
And right there, you see the dual nature of the covenant being established. It's immediate. Jehovah promises descendants like the sand of the sea. That's the earthly line. Physical Israel, but also like the stars of heaven. And that's interpreted as the heavenly or spiritual line of descendants.
That spiritual descendants part feels key. How does the study connect that to, say, the New Testament?
Well, it really hinges on his name change. He starts as Abram, but becomes Abraham,
Which means?
father of multitudes.
Yes.
And the study highlights the Hebrew, Ab Goyim. It basically means father of many nations, plural, not just the one nation of Israel.
Oh, okay.
Plus, he's called a friend of YHVH. And then you see the Apostle Paul, especially in Galatians, holding Abraham up as the gold standard for salvation by faith, not works.
Right, separating faith from adherence to the law.
Exactly. So in that sense, Abraham becomes the spiritual ancestor, the progenitor of Jesus Christ.
So that establishes the spiritual track, and then the study shifts into typology, doesn't it? These historical events acting as shadows or previews.
Precisely. And the prime example, the core of this redemptive blueprint, is the binding of Isaac, the sacrifice.
Yeah.
You have Abram, the father, commanded by God to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. The study presents this whole event as a literal pre-enactment, a foreshadowing of God the Father offering his son Jesus. It's John 3.1 scene, played out in advance.
And the location matters too, right? Many who follow this line of thinking believe Mount Moriah, where Abraham went, is the very same place that later became known as Calvary, where Jesus' sacrifice actually happened. It ties it all together geographically.
It really does bring the narrative full circle. But what's fascinating is how the study analyzes Abraham's mindset there, his belief.
What do they say about that?
Abraham reasoned, essentially, that if God demanded Isaac's death, but had also promised the Redeemer would come through Isaac's line,
Then God must have the power to
raise him from the dead. That's the implication. So when Jehovah provides the substitute, the ram caught in the thicket,
Yeah.
the authors argue Abraham, in a typological sense, received back Isaac as if from the dead.
Okay. But that substitution was a literal ram. How does the study make the leap from that ram to Jesus, 2,000 years later?
They argue the ram wasn't the final answer. It was a placeholder. It demonstrated the mechanism substitutionary atonement that would eventually be perfected by the promised seed of the woman from Genesis 3.
Ah, okay. So the ram shows how it works, but isn't the ultimate fulfillment.
Exactly. That perfected substitution was Jesus Christ. He was the manifestation of that ancient promise. And according to the source, only Jesus, the willing Son, possessed the inherent resurrection power needed to complete that picture.
Which then leads directly into the new covenant. Jesus' sacrifice achieving what the study calls complete and unconditional righteousness, available to anyone who believes.
Right. A righteousness that comes totally apart from the law, or good deeds, or even your ancestry. It fulfills and, in a sense, completes the Torah system. It secures redemption, sanctification, and ultimately glorification.
It's the spiritual fulfillment of that original promise to Abraham, shifting the basis from, say, works to that radical Abraham-style faith.
That's the argument, a shift from physical obedience primarily to heart-level faith.
Okay, now, here comes the big leap. Connecting all this ancient covenant stuff to the 20th century, the numerical claim we mentioned at the start.
Yes. The source points to the standard Jewish historical timeline, the one based on the Masoretic text.
And it claims
that Abram's birth year, in that chronology, is 1948 AM.
AM meaning Anno Mundi. Years from Adam, from creation.
Correct. 1948 years from Adam. That's the specific number derived from that textual tradition for Abram's birth.
Okay, I mean, that feels like a stretch. Is the study presenting some kind of complex mathematical proof for this link between 1948 AM and 1948 AD? Or is it more of a symbolic correlation? It sounds potentially like finding patterns where you want to see them.
Well, the authors don't present it as just a coincidence. They argue the boldness isn't just the number itself, but the underlying claim that history operates on a single, continuous, divinely ordained clock.
So they see this numerical sync as evidence, proof that 1948 AD wasn't random, but was programmed in from the beginning.
That's the core assertion. And if you accept that framework, it leads to some interesting side notes. Like, it means Abraham would have lived for about 50 years concurrently with the generation of Noah. He was born before that pre-flood generation completely died out.
Which gives that number a kind of contemporary weight, doesn't it? Especially with the common comparison in our current times to being as in the days of Noah.
Precisely. It adds that layer of resonance. So if Abraham's birth number correlates to Israel's modern rebirth, the study then asks, logically, what's next? What's the next major event predicted by this divine blueprint?
And their answer is?
The presentation of the bride, meaning the collected body of believers, the church, being presented to Christ.
And I'm guessing they use Abraham's life as the template for this too.
They do, absolutely. Prophetically, they see the Father presenting the bride to Christ, mirroring how Abraham, through his servant, sought out a bride, Rebekah, for his son Isaac.
And Rebekah had to be fetched, taken from her homeland.
Exactly, fetched and brought to Isaac.
So this bride of Christ, the study defines it as Jehovah's spiritual temple.
Yes, one that the Father is building now, using what the study calls live bricks, individual believers assembled by the Holy Spirit.
And the idea is once this spiritual building is complete,
it will be filled with the divine presence, fulfilling that temple promise made way back to Abraham, but on a spiritual level.
And this presentation, this event, is directly tied to the resurrection and the rapture, what the source calls the blessed hope.
That's the connection they make. The argument is the Holy Spirit will essentially extract the bride of Christ from the earth. They even draw a parallel to Isaac meeting Rebekah in the field.
Okay.
And the timing they propose is critical.
Yeah.
It occurs just before a period of intense global judgment, which the source explicitly compares to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right. So let's bring this back to 1948, the generation that witnessed Israel's rebirth. The study calls them the fig tree generation.
Yes, that's a common interpretation of certain biblical passages, linking the fig tree symbol to Israel and its restoration.
So the conclusion drawn is that this generation, the one that saw 1948, might be the one to see the completion of the spiritual temple of the bride.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
It puts the rapture, the blessed hope, potentially very close, next in line on this prophetic timeline they're tracing.
Now, things get even more complex because the study talks about parallel timelines, right, as the spiritual clock counts down to the bride's completion.
There's a suggestion that a physical timeline is running alongside it, specifically the potential or even probable construction of a physical third temple in Jerusalem.
But this third temple, in their view, has a completely different purpose, almost an opposite one.
Drastically different.
Yeah.
The study argues this temple won't be for Jehovah, but will be built as part of the Antichrist's covenant. It's designed to parallel Jesus' new covenant with the bride.
So a false covenant centered on a physical temple in Jerusalem.
Exactly. The prediction outlined is that Israel, the nation, will effectively enter into a covenant, a sort of marriage, with this false Messiah figure, the Antichrist. And that event marks the culmination of Daniel's 70th prophetic week of years. It's the ultimate counter move.
And this fits into a larger pattern. The source mentions a 70-year blueprint.
Yes, it draws parallels. It connects this potential period to historical cycles of judgment or transition involving 70 years, like the 70 years of Babylonian captivity. And significantly, the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 AD, that temple, Zerubbabel's rebuilt and then massively refurbished by Herod, was destroyed in that year 70.
So the generation that saw 1948 is now living within, or perhaps just past, a similar 70-year window, which the study sees as prophetically charged.
That's the framework. That 70-year marker following the 1948 rebirth seems to trigger or intensify this endgame prophetic activity according to their interpretation of Daniel and other prophecies.
It really is an intricate weaving together of numbers, historical echoes, typology, theology, all pivoting on that 1948 date.
Yes, the study uses 1948 not really as an endpoint in itself, but as the starting gun, the initiation point for the final countdown to complete this whole spiritual mission, this pattern laid out by Abraham.
So 1948 sets the stage for everything that follows, culminating in that spiritual separation of the bride and simultaneously this physical covenant in Jerusalem between Israel and the Antichrist figure.
That's the picture the source paints, in short. Two parallel tracks racing towards their respective conclusions.
So wrapping this up, what's the final takeaway for someone listening? The study concludes quite powerfully that Christians today, just like Abraham, are meant to be looking for the New Jerusalem. The one built not by human hands, but by the great architect of the universe, Jesus, the true Messiah of Israel. The Messiah whom, the study notes, the Gentiles ended up marrying spiritually because national Israel at that time chased after other lovers and gods.
A provocative framing.
It is. So if this study timeline, this interpretation hold any weight, 1948 wasn't just a historical event. It was a signal flare, a starting pistol for perhaps the final leg of the race, which means for you, listening now, the real question isn't if prophecy might be unfolding, but how you understand your own place within it. Are you part of the construction crew, so to speak, for that ultimate spiritual city? It certainly imparts a sense of, well, urgency.